So we are honored to have with us today Chef Andrew Gruel, who is the Chief Nutrition Officer at the Wellness Company. Am I correct on that?
Yep.
So I'm curious, how did you get involved with the Wellness Company? Obviously, you're a food guy. Tell me about your business and how you got involved with TWC.
Certainly. Well, my whole entire really overview in food has been about kind of breaking the supply chain up a little bit, trying to serve the
Hmm.
quality of fine dining, but also farm to table, real healthy food at that cost and convenience of faster food. I started a fast casual concept, grew to about 40 locations, with that being the mission. I got really deep in the food system and understanding that supply chain, how upside down it is, and why
Hmm.
it's very difficult to assess good food. And I started talking with the wellness company before they thought about getting involved with food specifically, when they were doing more nutraceuticals. And I
Yeah.
loved what they were doing with supply chain in that regard, right? From medicine, and really giving consumers the ability to kind of make decisions for themselves when it comes to their health, and not being relegated to just a doctor and a pharmaceutical scratch pad. And that was a model that I think and feel that we need in food in general, right? Farms, our supply
Totally.
chain, getting good food, real food to people. And interestingly, as I got to know them, they were in the process of developing and growing out that same framework for food specifically now to start, these meat boxes, and ultimately
Hmm.
chicken and other proteins, and then beyond. So I was excited to jump aboard in order to really help take kind of my philosophy and that mantra and apply some of the wisdom that I've seen through the food system to that, and also get consumers to understand with a bit more clarity what they're eating and why they should be making better choices. And now, obviously, Wellness Farms, the arm of the wellness company, giving consumers the opportunity to break that supply chain and get good meat right now. The beef, mRNA free,
Hmm.
vaccine free, direct from the farm.
So is there a network of farms that you're dealing with, or
Yeah.
are
So
you
right now,
involved in that
I mean,
side of it?
the
Yeah.
idea right now is just, from the wellness farms, is just
Hmm.
connecting with really good ranchers, U.S.
Hmm.
ranchers, and taking, a portion of their supply to be able to
Yeah.
process it ourselves, and then directly distribute it through the wellness companies, their supply network, which is really like their members and their subscribers,
Yeah.
and the infrastructure that they've built up, so that we're cutting out all those middlemen. But we also know exactly, you know, they've touched the cattle. They know exactly what is ending up on the consumer's plate.
So that's huge, right? I mean, because there's a lot of monkey business going on. I mean, I was reading about food glue in the meats, and I've done a lot of work with a rancher out in Nebraska before, and how the beef is fed, and is it finished on grains? Is it all grass or whatever? I mean, what is the typical profile of the beef? Do you know that is coming in?
Yeah, so grass raised, grass finished, and then they finish on some other items. I think the
Mm-hmm.
key with the beef, when you talk about clean meat, right? You
Hmm.
want to make sure that the animals are healthy. That's
Yeah.
the most important thing that I think Americans overlook, is that we've gotten into this pattern in America of just mass production, and you
Yeah.
lose the ability to give the animal, granted you're going to be eating it, but give it a good, healthy life. And it's that good,
Sure.
healthy life that creates a healthy animal, which creates healthy meat, which is then good for us. Because when you have sick animals, then you treat them with medicine, right? Specifically antibiotics, we've heard a lot about. I mean, 75% of the antibiotics in the United States is used on animals, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Specifically cattle. And that, there's certain rules and laws about tracing that, kind of diluting that out of the animal before it's ultimately harvested and slaughtered. However, we still don't know. I mean, the science isn't settled on that, whether you're really losing the antibiotic residue, because now we see these superbugs, and all the doctors and scientists, once again, typical kind of trust the science. In the beginning, they're like, oh, it's great. But now we find out that maybe it's not so good, that we've
Yeah.
been consuming all these animals. So that's one of the keys with the wellness farms meat, is making sure that it's antibiotic free its entire life cycle. Why that's important is that if you don't need to use antibiotics, it's bigger than just the absence of the medicine. It's more about the health of the animal,
Hmm.
because you never needed to use it. A sick animal is also isn't it doesn't taste good, to be frank. Let's get
Yeah.
down to
Sure.
the
Yeah.
official element. So that's a key piece of it. And then ultimately, like the vaccine element, mRNA is now being used through husbandry and poultry and pigs, and we're seeing
Hmm.
it being introduced through cattle. And that's once again, another puzzle piece because people are really concerned about that. So it's kind of a proxy or a secondary avenue through which they're getting a lot of these under-regulated drugs by big pharma into our food system and into us.
Well, there's a shedding problem too that they don't really understand,
Yep.
right? If your pet or your meat or whatever has this mRNA in it, it could be getting on you just by contact. Do you know if that's the same with meat? You may not, but
Yeah, I mean, well, ultimately, if you manipulate the RNA and then
mhm,
subsequently the DNA, and then you're consuming that, I mean, we don't know what the long term effects are. And for anybody to
that's yeah,
suggest that it's 100% clean and clear and that they know, that's just not true. That's not scientifically possible by virtue of just studying data
right.
over a
What
long
so
period of time.
are you not using antibiotics on the beef or excuse me on the poultry or the pork as well?
Well, we haven't introduced those lines yet, but that'll
Okay,
ultimately be branded. That's one of the selling points for those items as well. And we're talking with those
okay,
farmers and those ranchers too. But it's in regards to the meat and the meat boxes that we just started offering. Yeah, that's mRNA free,
mhm,
antibiotic free, and it's clean. And you know where it's coming from. It's coming directly from the farm. It's processed, and then it gets to you. And there's no middlemen, right? So no manipulation. And I think
yeah,
there's an economic piece of this too that's important to talk about because it's also about the big, kind of the big four. There's four main meat processors and packers that are controlling the whole industry, and they're really
mhm.
ripping a lot of the livelihood away from some of these small
So
independent
true.
meat
Yeah.
farmers.
So all of these are not from the big 4 meat production companies,
No, I
correct?
mean we're saying, look, we're going to buy X amount of head, and these are
Mhm.
ours, and then we're going to process them, and they're going to go directly to the consumer. So that gives the rancher an opportunity now to circumvent that.
Totally.
I don't want to say tainted supply chain, but I would certainly say that the supply chain isn't motivated to keep us healthy.
So true. So is it all US? I mean, does made in the
Yep.
USA you see a lot of. Does that mean actually made in the USA when USDA says it? Do you know?
Well, it depends, right? Like, so with ground beef, I mean, if it says U.S. raised, the USDA labels it as U.S. beef, and it's a
Uh-huh.
whole muscle cut, then it has to be. You won't see that a lot, though. That's what's
Yeah,
interesting. We kind of assume that to be the case, but that's not always the case when you look at how much of our meat and ultimately eggs and other products are imported.
sure.
It's the ground beef too that you really got to be concerned about because that's where they're cutting in, Brazilian meat, Honduran meat, like just meat from all over the world, and you don't know how that's being treated.
Wow, so true. What about the beef numbers? There's a huge I guess you go to the store, the steaks are really expensive, right? And that's a lot due to the lower count of the cattle, correct?
Well, yeah, I mean, ultimately that is supply and demand, but then that's also
Mhm,
input, transportation. I mean, those are
mhm,
the general elements of the economy that's going to apply
mhm.
to that. But then it's also the kind of the oligopoly, the ability to control the price because of a lack of competition gives a lot of these packers they can pass through so much of the cost, and the consumers don't have an alternate option.
Yeah,
So that's where in the absence of a competitive supply chain alongside, whether you want to call it parallel or what have you, that's where they can control that pricing. And we see those prices really ride the index, whether it's CPI,
mhm.
inflation. But I think that, they can manipulate that too. That's the key. So that's why it's always good to kind of know your farmer, at least know where your product is coming from and know that it's a direct supply chain.
We were importing for a while. We had an advertiser, and his business ended up changing, but so he's not advertising with us anymore. But it was in Nebraska, and the taste of the beef direct from the farms
Oh,
was so much different. It's like buying a tomato in the grocery store. Most
yeah.
of them you can't. There's no taste. They taste like plastic. But when you go get a real one off the farm, it's night and day. And the same was with the beef. Is that what you're getting your customers saying?
Oh, 1000%. And
Mm,
that's the key, right? Like I try not to get into and obfuscate the conversation with a lot of the economic supply chain, health and science pieces because at the end of the day,
mhm.
people just want quality, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I kind of say it jokingly, more to seafood, but sustainable tastes better. So when people make decisions about what they're going to eat, a lot of people are driven by principle. But at the end of the day, like people want good quality product first before
Right,
anything else.
right.
So for me as a chef, right, like at the end of the day, I'm really a chef and I think about quality. And when I eat this meat and you taste the difference, and I always do these side by side comparisons with customers and team members, and I'm like, taste the difference. I mean, it is savory, it is rich. It's
Mhm.
almost not gamey, but not in a bad way, right? Like you can actually taste the product as opposed to something you're chewing in. It's just really has that flavor of cardboard. It is. You can taste the terroir like wine. I mean,
Mhm, mhm.
when people taste wine, it's like they get into the detail of the grape. I could feel a cool breeze at one point on this grape as I'm drinking this wine. I mean, meat's the same way.
Sure, sure. How did you decide on the wellness company? You mentioned you just, were aware of what they were doing. I mean, what else attracted you to them?
Well, I mean, they're putting principle over profit, I think, to some
Uh-huh.
degree. So they said, Foster, the founder of the wellness company, said, "Look, there's this issue in our supply chain, especially coming out of COVID, and that consumers don't have the ability to make medical decisions for themselves, and it's so
Mhm.
easy to be able to circumnavigate the lopsided supply chain that's in place right now where consumers can't make medical decisions for themselves. And let's pull together, minds from the medical community, people like Dr. Peter McCullough,
Mhm.
Dr. Drew Pinsky, Dr. Kelly
Yep.
Vick. He pulled together all of these doctors and said, look, let's really work with the patients and let's get them these products, whether it's nutraceuticals, whether it's the emergency wellness kits, the medicines that they need
Yeah.
day in and day out, and some antibiotics that they can buy and they can consistently they can garner these products without having to go through the gauntlet of medical hell,
Yeah.
insurance companies, etc., going to the doctor. Now they can just do it over the phone. They can do it with a click of a button, and they know that they're getting the products that they need, because they've done the research themselves and they're not being manipulated by the medical community.
What's the pushback? You're a chef. I mean, you see, I mean, food, local farms is all big, but there is an attack, I think, on our food supply. And what are you seeing on the ground, pushback against this health movement? Where are you?
Yeah, the biggest pushback I would say is the inability to release or remove some of the barriers that allow food service operators, right? Because I
Uh-huh.
kind of go down from like the biggest guys, which are the food producers and packers, and then you kind of go
Yeah.
down that supply chain. And the food service operators are the ones that are really distributing both retail and restaurant the
Mhm.
lion's share of this food. And it's hard. They make it very difficult for us to be able to buy these products.
Mm.
That's where I keep going back to this supply chain piece, because let's
Yeah.
just say you open a restaurant tomorrow and you're like, I'm going to buy everything local, and I'm going to make sure that every single thing comes within a 50-mile radius, or at least we know the farms and we know where it's coming from. You would be hard pressed to be able to get that product to your restaurant without almost renting a truck and driving out and picking it up yourself, which, in the restaurant business, that's virtually impossible to do. So you're kind of relegated to one or two of these big distributors, and they will not supply any of that product because their largest customers, the people giving them the beef, who are selling to one or two of these big packers, they want the small guys to have to sell to the auction lots to get sucked up to one of these two big packers.
Yeah.
So if you're siphoning off from the bottom of that supply chain and getting the good stuff, well, they don't want that, right? They want it consolidated, and they want it all kind of treated with the same chemicals, and they want it consistent, and they want the prices low, as if it's just a commodity product.
Mhm.
So that's the hardest thing right there, which is where I think it's interesting. And I connected with Wellness Company is because they look at it the same way. They're like, we got to shake the supply chain up so that we can create these tentacles of supply to the people who actually care about the product and want to do so. And that takes, economically, that's not always the most efficient move. But once you get some critical mass going, it can be very positive for both the consumer and ultimately financially and economically. But it's a huge risk. I mean, it's 10x the risk to do it that way than it would be to just start a regular restaurant, in my analogy, and just buy from the big guys.
Well, you can tell when you're at one of those restaurants buying from the big guys because the food is, just not spectacular in my opinion.
Mhm.
You gotta. So, what can a Joe bag of donuts on the ground do to help that process? I mean, what is to like insist on certain foods or what?
Yeah, I mean, look, right now, it's certainly when you're going out to eat, it's just about awareness, right? So,
Yeah.
like, obviously, talking to the restaurants, your local restaurants, trying to support some of those people that are doing it, right? So, a lot of times it's like, okay, I can go to this kind of commercialized 500 unit steakhouse, or I find
Mhm.
the local guy who's doing the right thing. Now, that might be a
Yeah.
couple of dollars more on the steak,
Yeah.
but if you start even moving a little bit of that demand over and helping those small guys, and really voting with your fork, if you will, that's going to make a big change. And just being loud, like I know
Mhm.
in this world of social media being king, it is important that we talk about this type of stuff because people are legislating off of these social media platforms. They're
Totally.
using them as focus groups. They're understanding what the market wants, and then they're making changes, albeit some of them are very small. They're still changes nonetheless.
Well, they're mining the data for sure, and
Yeah.
then that gets fed up for the policymakers or whatever. So, I had a farm a decade ago, and I had a small produce business just
Oh,
delivering to some
cool.
of the restaurants. So I totally understand where you're coming from. It's a monopolistic. It's almost well, it is a mafia business in some places.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, to break into that cycle and to get that diner or whatever, and to get that business is pretty tough. And then they come back and they pressure the owner not to buy from you. And so I totally get what you're saying, man. Are you seeing success in this?
Yeah, I am. We're seeing success across the
Mhm.
board, and when I say we, I mean those of us that are part of this kind of movement to really move and our food supply in the right direction.
Mhm.
To use the example you just
Mhm.
laid out there, which is your
Mhm.
anecdotal, it's your real
Mhm.
life experience.
Mhm.
When you're going to that local diner and you're trying to get them to switch over to you, like you really need a selling proposition that trumps
Yeah,
just the dollars and cents. Because
totally. You
if
can't
you've
beat them
done
on
this,
price. Yeah,
you're giving them a price sheet and then they're just looking at the number, right?
yeah,
Case
yeah.
size, money, that's it. Tomato,
This guy's
tomato.
a quarter cheaper. I'm gonna buy from him.
Yeah, exactly. So it's about establishing the value that the better product really is important. And
Mhm.
I think what we're starting to see, at least over the past year or two, especially with like RFK and Maha
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
companies like the Wellness Company pushing these things forward, is that people understand, oh wow, there is a significant value to that. So now when I'm comparing these two price sheets or inventory sheets, I'm looking at quality is a real important figure or metric in those numbers, and it's not just the raw sense.
Yeah, and you gotta make relationships with the chefs like you and the guys making the call at the restaurant where they're gonna buy from and what do they want and all that's fascinating. Andrew, anything else you wanna get out, man? Appreciate it.
No, I mean, I think in regards to just kind of what the Wellness Farms is doing now is
Mhm.
utilizing exactly what they put in place in regards to the wellness company with the medicine and the
Mhm.
nutraceuticals, and saying, look, let's do the same thing. Let's give consumers the ability to have more freedom making choices when they're at the dinner table or with their fork, if you will, and let's
Yeah.
create that supply. Let's start to siphon off all those great products that are kind of getting sucked up in into the mass of I don't want to say evil, but into the mass of poor products. And let's pull out those great products, those local ranchers, those local producers, and let's create our own supply chain so we can make sure that they get the money they need in order to continue to grow, right? To help local communities, but then the
Mhm.
consumer is able to get the right products so that they're eating well and thinking about their health. Because at the end of the day, if we want to save a couple dollars, we're ultimately going to pay it back in healthcare costs down the road by buying the wrong product.
Totally agree, and I think you guys also need to, be aware that there is an effort to, like, stop what you're doing.
Yeah.
So that you have to be aware of not being painted as, like, the new evil corporation, but keep that local touch is key in my opinion. Anyway, thank you, Andrew. I really appreciate it, man.
Thanks
We'll
so
have
much
you
for that.
back. Take
Appreciate
care.
it.
Bye.